Happy Tuesday night, everybody. Mike Yuva here, and intern Joe, he's out at the Masters working this week, so no intern Joe this week. That's all right. Plenty to get into. Shane Beamer spoke today as South Carolina wrapped up practice number 10 of the spring. They also had their first scrimmage over the weekend, so we will get to that as well. And anything else that you guys want to discuss on this Tuesday night. Gamecock baseball, they'll be in action in Charlotte taking on UNC, so we will give you updates throughout the night. But as we've said many, many times before, just like going to the movie theaters, just like going to the grocery store, there's not just one item out there, right? If you want to watch baseball tonight, you can do that. If you want to talk some football with us, we'll be more than happy to have you. So where I want to begin things tonight, South Carolina, they held their first scrimmage over the weekend. Shane Beamer, he talked a little bit about it today. I'll share some of the things that, if you heard from Beamer as well, going on GC or going on to the University of South Carolina's YouTube page, you had a chance to go back and listen to that press conference. I'll share some of the other things that weren't discussed and how some of the guys looked out there. One thing I do want to say going into this is DeCarrion Joyner. There's a real possibility we could be seeing 5 in the backfield a lot this season. And if that is the case, when you look at his skill set, we understand what he brings to the table. We know how athletic he is. We know how talented he is and how much just nightmares he can create anytime he has the ball in his hand. And there's a reason why he's been also getting some work back on special teams, shagging kicks. It's because he's dangerous when he's out in space. He's been doing this all the way back to his high school days at Fort Dorchester. There's a reason why when South Carolina recruited him, when you saw him in that spring game and just the way he was able to move, he's just a freakish athlete. He's a freakish athlete. So that's where I want to begin. Shane Beamer mentioned it today. Between Juju, Mario Anderson, and DeCarrion Joyner, those three saw a lot of touches on Saturday. From what I was told, DK saw a lot. Now, it's tough to break it down saying, all right, here's the ones, here's the twos, here's the threes. Today at practice, in the media, we're allowed to have 6 periods where we're able to observe practice. For what it's worth, and again, it's spring football, you're going to be constantly moving guys around to get feels for, okay, what are they looking like in this group? But I think it is something at least to pay attention to, seeing that Joyner was with the twos today for, again, the limited time that we were there. This past weekend, though, Joyner saw a lot of action at running back. And not only did he see a lot of action, because, again, Beamer mentioned today that, if you want to break it down from a depth chart standpoint, and we know when it comes to running backs with him, you can go back to last season, right? Go back to the year before. There's a lot of oars in there, which I get it. As a fan, as a media member, drives you nuts. You'd like to know who the guy's going to be going into it that weekend. But using Beamer's words today, Juju, Mario, Joyner, 1A, 1B, 1C. The way that I would look at it right now from what I've been told and the things that we've been able to observe in our short time of practice, DK is getting a lot of reps with the twos. And on Saturday, he had a productive day at running back. He had a lot of opportunities. He was getting touches, both on the ground, both through the air. He's going to create nightmares. Because we can just go down the list of possibilities, right? Okay, he can run the ball, he can catch the football. But you throw him out there in a shotgun situation with Spencer Rattler, my goodness. Think of just the nightmares that could create defensive coordinators in the SEC. And not just the SEC, think week 1. I mean, if any team should be ready for Joyner to do whatever he pleases to your defense, it should be North Carolina. After what DK did in the Duke's Mayo Bowl just over a year ago. So that's where I wanted to begin tonight because, again, we've heard over the last couple weeks that Joyner was working with the running backs and these scrimmages, and certainly, right, we're going to overanalyze. We're going to overhype a little bit because that's where we are right now. 10 practices in. We're in freaking spring, for crying out loud. And the Gamecock football program, and Beamer mentioned it today, the excitement level, it hasn't been this way in over a decade. Hasn't been this way in over a decade. And I would even argue that it could be even higher than it was back then. And the reason I say that is just because with what's taking place right now with social media and how that's obviously grown and what South Carolina is doing from a recruiting standpoint, I think more people are paying attention to it now than ever before. I always refer to them as the pink hat fans, the fans that, they're not really paying attention. They don't know what the hell's going on. They don't even know what the difference between a grapefruit and a football is. But they know that something special is going on over at South Carolina. They're paying attention to it. And even if they don't know how necessarily to read the recruiting breakdowns and, recruiting class, they know something's going on at South Carolina that has a lot of people talking. Has people that maybe they were fans, 5, 6, 7 years ago, started to dip a little bit during the Muschamp era. And then because of what's took place over the last couple of years, it has them a little bit more excited now. I'm not going to do, and I know I took a lot of crap for it last year, and I stand by it. I'm not going to be celebrating how many freaking people are in the stands for a spring game. I'm not doing that. Okay. We're not going to be freaking putting a banner in the stadium and having a parade down Main Street because there's X amount of people in the stadium. Okay. But with that being said, I do expect the spring game, if weather permits, of course, I do expect there to be a lot of people. And if that lower level's not full, it's going to be freaking close to it. I think that's how much excitement there is with this program heading into this season. And that's not to say last season there wasn't. That's not saying last year didn't have that buzz. Certainly that momentum that was created from the end of last season. And obviously we're talking now Beamer's first year in South Carolina, 2021. Being able to, in the way they did, being able to get bowl eligible for the first time in what felt like forever. And you become bowl eligible and you get that win. And then obviously a couple weeks beforehand, Spencer Rattler, he commits to your program and you get all this momentum going on. The momentum now, it's not the exact same because of, but even with that loss against Notre Dame, because of what you did at the end of the regular season, I think it's even bigger. Going to the ND game. And I know ND was out, we're up without some guys themselves, but USC had no tight ends, right? Running back room was defensive line. You had guys opting out in your secondary. So again, that's not to say bowl games don't mean anything, but what I'm trying to get at is, despite losing in that Gator Bowl, the momentum, you can still feel it. And I'd argue that it's bigger now than it was a year ago. How we doing, David? David Williams joining us tonight. If you guys got a comment, let us know. Intern Joe, he is off tonight. I'm going to shoot this thing off real quick on social media. Usually Intern Joe's juggling that while I'm sending this out. But we will answer any questions you guys have with South Carolina as they wrapped up practice number 10 today of spring football. One thing I really want to get into, and I know, Nick, you've mentioned who do you think RB1 is right now, and I will get to that shortly. There's another thing that Beamer answered today. I brought up the question after hearing Hugh Freeze over at Auburn talk about it the other day. I think it was actually earlier this morning, about scrimmaging other teams, whether that be in the spring, whether that be before the start of the season. And I think Beamer kind of took it more of a in general when he came down to answering it, opposed to Freeze, who was specifically talking about the spring. But I thought Beamer gave a good answer with that. So we will play that for you tonight as well. But again, guys, GC Live talking Tuesday night. South Carolina baseball is in action, but we will have football talk here, as Thomas says. Can y'all find the South Carolina versus North Carolina baseball game? I'll give you the updates, Thomas. We will give you guys the updates. I believe it is on the SEC Network Plus, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see, make sure I get that right for you. Yep. SEC Network Plus is where that game is. And I don't know if they're starting right on time. First pitch was supposed to be at 7. Pull up the stat broadcast to be able to give you updates. Yep. All right. So it's started on time, top of the second right now. It is scoreless, no hit still, as they have just begun the second inning, and Becker is on the mound. So we will give you updates on USC baseball this evening, as we also talk Gamecock football. So going back to next question, who do you think is RB1 right now? I think it's hard to argue that it would be Juju McDowell. Now, what does Juju's workload look like? Right? If Juju's the starting running back as of today, and I think a lot of us going back to the beginning of spring football, I think we all would have agreed, okay, when you look at the majority of that room being walk-on running backs, you add in a new running back in Mario Anderson from Division II Newberry, who has had a very good spring. He's coming along, right? He's starting to piece things together. It's not just going to happen overnight, but he's a very talented running back. And once he figures out the blocking assignments, that is everything that goes with playing running back in the SEC, because as we all know, it's not just here's the ball and take off. So I think he's going to be fine. It's just going to take some time. And he's doing a good job. Again, he's doing a very good job. And seeing him move around on special teams as well, he's a guy that should make an impact right away, at least in one phase of the game. But I also think he'll be playing some, special teams and offense. I think you will see him on special teams, though, just because the way he moves, the size that he has. And I think he's going to really be able to realize that from a terminology standpoint, South Carolina, and they do this on purpose. Not every team does this, which blows my mind. They use the same language when it comes to special team. So when you're talking about blocking angles, when you're talking about from a linebacker, when you're talking about a receiver, they use the same language. And I know there's some people, they hear that and they're going to be like, okay, what's the big deal with that? You'd be amazed by how many teams don't do that. And I don't want to necessarily, talk in circles here or give people popsicle headaches. But the point being is the way you talk about taking an angle as a linebacker and the way maybe you take an angle to stock block as a wide receiver. Some teams, they use different terminology. They call it something different. So now you go on special teams, and what happens? Well, some coaches want to reinvent the wheel, and they want to call it something else too. And when you have 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, and you're trying to have them pick up on a short period of time that is designated for special teams, not just on the field, but in the classroom as well. And even though Shane Beamer, he probably gives more special teams time to Lembo than a lot of other coaches get across the country. But at the same time, too, you have only X amount of time to do that. So you want to be able to be efficient. You don't want to be dicking around. You don't want to be wasting time. You don't want to have to be explaining things. No, when we say this is what we're talking about with this angle, banana peeling, or whatever the case may be. So I just bring that up because I think those things will help Mario. And not just Mario. You talk about some of the transfers as well. Nick Elksness, right? Some of the other guys that are coming in here who should make an impact on special teams. They'll see that there's similarities. They'll see that there's terminology that they're using at their positional group, that their positional coach is using, so that once they get on special teams, they're going to realize, shoot, this is the exact same thing that I've been doing for my position. I'm just doing it now on kickoff return, right? If I'm blocking or whatever the case may be. So I want to hit on that because I think that will help him. But I think Juju right now is your starter as of today. I think the way that Joyner's performing, again, I know what Beamer said today, 1A, 1B, 1C. I really think Joyner, based on how he's been performing and the trust level too, the trust is there in terms of when you put DK out there. Now, the only question, which I haven't got a full report on yet, is how DK does from a blocking standpoint at running back. Picking up blocks on the edge, off the edge, and, up the middle. Because he's played quarterback, there's things that guys, we hear more so with guys that have played quarterback that end up going out to wide receiver, right? Julian Edelman. Or guys, even like Tim Tebow, when they make the move from wide receiver to tight end. And hopefully, if that's the case for some of these guys, they're going to be able to do a little bit better than Timmy did over in Jacksonville. But what I'm trying to get at is, because of that experience of having played quarterback, you're able to bring things to the table now, a perspective that not a lot of other players have. And yes, I understand that this is a new offense that they're in under Dal Loggins. I understand that. But at the same time, too, there's only X amount of routes that you can run. There's only so many blocking schemes that you can do. And as we all know, DeCarrion is a very, very smart individual. Heading into his 6th year of playing collegiate football and having gone through, make sure my math is correct. I want to say 3 offensive coordinators. Maybe it's 4. I'll have to go back and count one, make sure I'm not missing one. There could be a 4th one in there. But the whole point being is he's gone through this before. He's gone through changes. He had to go through it at arguably the toughest position to go through a change, which is at quarterback. And then he had to go learn wide receiver. And then he was hopping around. So I say that because if Joyner's able to pick up the blocking as far as running back is concerned, I can see him being there as that number 2 guy. Now the question becomes, how good does he do in that role? And again, this is only September. We're not talking about September. We're talking about April freaking 4th. So what does it look like during that second scrimmage? Because there'll be another scrimmage, and then the lights turn on, literally, for that spring game. And I'm not saying that what Joyner or any of those players do in that spring game isn't going to be important in terms of finding out who can be this guy or that guy heading into fall camp. But at the same time, too, I know that there's some coaches that value spring practices more than the actual game itself, the spring game. They want to see you do it in those 14 practices. When the lights turn on, it's more so for the younger guys than anything else. They want to see how the young players can respond in those spring games. Because having those scrimmages, you're able to really control what the hell you want to do, right? I think Beamer said there's probably close to 100 snaps they ran the other day. Got some special teams work in there as well. But the whole point is, and we all do it, we're all guilty of it, we see a performance in the spring game, and naturally we want to say, all right, player X, player Y, whoever the case may be, that player is going to be atop the depth chart. That player should be here. That player should be there. I mean, think back a couple of years ago. People were doing that with Jason Brown, and I love the kid. Absolutely love Jason Brown. But Jason was doing that against the 3rd team and 4th team defenses in that spring game. And the other part of it is not just the fans, of course, but even the media. We're not at practice every day. What did Jason look like during those 14 other practices? So I'm picking on Jason for an example, because obviously just being so recent, And I think a lot of fans can remember that after that spring game. It's like, wow, look what he did. And he did some good things. And when his number was called, especially that Florida game, he stepped up and had a performance that Gamecock fans will remember for a long, long, long time to come. But I bring that up because, again, what we see in that spring game in, what is that, 11 days, less than 2 weeks from now, what we see in that spring game, I think it's going to be more, it's going to give us a taste of what to expect from a depth standpoint, but I would not hang my hat on that. I think if we see Joyner go out there and just absolutely light it up, goodness, I think it's a given that you have to give the guy an opportunity, especially in a running back room, which, again, as of today, we don't know what's going to happen in a month when the transfer portal opens up again. That second window, that spring window between May 1st and May 15th. We don't know what USC could do. I know that there's some players out there that USC has been talking to, not saying specifically running back. I know defensive players, linebackers, that there's players that USC is looking at that they could get from the transfer portal. Some of those guys are grad transfers as well, so a little bit different. But point being is there's going to be guys out there that USC could bring in. And if it just happens to be a running back, how much does that impact the way the depth chart is looking like today? Again, you look at USC's running back room right now. It's just Juju. It's just Dakereon Joyner, who was added to the running back room just a couple weeks ago. Really? I mean, even if it was a conversation that was going on for the last couple months, first time out there as a running back, in pads at least, since I think Sweet Lou Bajak over at the state newspaper brought up, I think Joyner got a little bit of work at running back his freshman year of high school for a brief period of time, but you get the point. This is the first time he's playing running back. So I think how things play out these next couple weeks, yeah, it could make the coaching staff feel a little bit better if a guy like DK is able to take that next step. If a guy like Juju's able to get pushed from this. That's something that I'm interested to learn more about over the next couple days and heading into the spring game. How has Juju responded to all this? Does Juju take this the right way? Because Juju right now, he's the guy. He's the guy. And we could sit here, we could talk about from a metric standpoint, okay, his height, his size, this and that. We know how shifty he is when he has the ball out in space. And as I've said many times on this program, the days of giving it to your running back 25 plus 30 times a game, Juju doesn't have to be that guy. He doesn't have to be that guy. The game's different. The game's evolved. There's going to be outliers, as I've said before. There'll be outliers. There'll be guys that get the rock 25, 30 times on the ground. But I think you'll see Juju also catching passes out of the backfield as well. But point being is this, look, and then you also got to remember Dontavius Braswell will be coming in too, true freshman from Georgia, speedster. I think DK has a really, really good opportunity to go out there and be the number 2 guy, and if not, push for the starting job. And that's no disrespect with Juju. I just think when you look at the built of their bodies, I mean, it's truly thunder lightning, right? I mean, it's fastball, changeup. Their bodies are built differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. So again, that's getting way ahead of ourselves. Jeff's asked, hope DK has the biggest year yet. I hope he can become a main weapon and gets his chance to shine. He deserves it. He's earned it. He just needs to be put in the right position. I agree, Jeff. And look, I can already see it now. DK goes out there against North Carolina, and he's at running back. And regardless of what that stat line is, right? You know, he has maybe, I don't know, 11 carries for 90-something yards, a touchdown. He made some good blocks in the backfield protecting Rattler, who was able to step up in the pocket and complete some passes, throw a couple touchdowns. And, Joyner made some plays out of the backfield in the receiving game. I can see it now. The message boards, social media, talk show, radio show, all sports talk radio, it's all going to be the same. Why did it take this long? Why did it take that long to figure it out? Sometimes it just comes down to a team need, right? A team need. And I'm telling you, the review so far on Joyner at running back, very, very positive. Very positive. And like I said before, what he can bring to that offense, never mind the backfield, never mind the leadership, never mind the intangibles that he can bring. What he can bring to this offense because of the skills he has, because of the skills he's exhibited before. Throwing the ball, catching the ball, running the football. That's scary. You have him on the field at the same time with Spencer Rattler. Are you freaking kidding me? Juice out there. I mean, goodness. But, again, we'll have to wait and see how things play out. James says, you running the 5K. I wasn't planning on it. I think Wes Mitchell, my colleague, has been signed up for that. If maybe I'll look into it. I can't remember the last time I ran like a 5K, other than running by yourself or whatever. I'm talking like an actual 5K race. We'll look into it. Dylan says, Kobe Johnson from North Dakota State, local Atlanta kid, should get a look from the Gamecocks. I'll say this. Can't speak specifically about Kobe. Wes and Chris, they're on top of it when it comes to all the recruiting stuff. But there were some players there today that South Carolina, I don't know if we can specifically say the names. I don't know how that all works, so I'll be safe and not say it. But there were some players there today, grad transfers, portal guys that were visiting South Carolina today that have experience of playing college football. So it shouldn't come as a surprise because this is the case, across the country. But I think South Carolina has done a really, really good job with being able to take advantage of the portal the first 2 years. And, we can pick on Clemson a little bit. They've had success. They've obviously took a step back, it seemed like last year, and I'm sure a lot of people that follow their program would agree. They're one of those teams that really hasn't taken advantage of the portal. And how does that play out over the next couple of years? There's nothing wrong with having pride and being able to do things the way that you've always done it. I totally understand that. I respect that. It doesn't have to be Clemson. It could be anybody. But will that catch up to them? It might. It might not necessarily be this year. Or was it last year? I think there's so many players still that they've recruited over the last couple of years. It's still too tough to say, too early to call that. But something to keep an eye on with the Tigers. Brett says, hey, Mike, why did Coach seem a little down today at his presser? I don't know, Brent. Now you have me. I mean, I'm not Dr. Phil. I'm not analyzing the moods always for me unless it's really extreme. Maybe it didn't come across that way to me. I think more than anything, look, even though it's spring football, you have that going on. You have recruiting about to really start to pick up, even though, as we all know, recruiting never ends, especially now in the world of the transfer portal. I think that's just the man that's just exhausted right now. I think he's exhausted. And I think a lot of coaches probably feel that way, not just at South Carolina, but across the country. So the challenging part is he alluded to today in his press conference is having Easter this upcoming Sunday, having it then, and then being able to come back. I think he said they're going to be practicing on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. I think that's what he said. I think doing that, and then obviously the spring game that Saturday next week, following week. I think it's one of those things that we talk about fatigue that coaches probably have from recruiting and just everything that they're juggling right now. The fact that they're going to be going home, these players, he wants to make sure that when they come back, that there's no letdown. Because how easy could it be for them to go back, right? Sit on the couch, fat and jolly, right? Stuff in your face with ham, turkey, whatever the hell you eat on Thanksgiving. And you get back on campus and you have 4 more opportunities to get better in pads. 3 practices and 1 scrimmage. You have 4 more opportunities. I remember from college with spring football, there were times that Easter was thrown in the middle of it, or spring break, or we typically had spring football at the beginning. When I say the beginning, I'm talking about the beginning compared to all the other colleges. Sometimes it was in March so I say that because when you do come back, when you do have that break thrown in there, it is challenging because you find out, okay, have there been guys that have been just sitting on their ass the last X amount of days? I'm trying to think how many days they'll be off. I think he said they're going to be gone for the weekend. So I don't know, that's 5 days, 6 days, 4 days, whatever the case may be. But have they just been sitting on their ass the last couple of days, or have they been moving around? Do they truly want to get better? Do they truly want to compete for that starting job that may be available? If they're an underclassman and maybe they're not happy with their role, or maybe there's just someone on the team in general that's not happy with their role, what do they do over the break? And you're able to find out quickly. Yeah, there's guys that are naturally talented and, right? Think about that buddy of yours. He doesn't necessarily need to even swing a club, right? Maybe he shows up right before tea time, or he hasn't picked up the clubs in a couple months. He just goes right out there, and naturally he's just talented. Yeah, of course there's guys like that can go back and they'll be fine. But knowing that there's a lot of positions that are up for grabs this year. And that's something that Beamer mentioned today. And I think it all goes hand in hand together, which is your upperclassmen, you want them to be able to set the tone. What they do over the break, just like how it is every day when they're on campus, how they handle themselves is the same way the underclassmen are going to handle themselves. They set the tone. And as we would often say, with our coaches in college, they would say, you're just a dumb freshman. You don't know any better, right? You don't know what the hell you're doing. You pay attention to the upperclassmen. So saying all that, I think a lot of it's just going to come down to how the upperclassmen handle things when they get back here. Are they sluggish, or are they moving around with their hair on fire? Because that's going to set the tone for the younger guys. And the younger guys that had just been playing grab ass the last couple days during that Easter weekend break, the upperclassmen will let them know. And they'll find out quickly, hey, if you want to be able to play in this program, you want to be able to compete for one of those starting spots that maybe you've been griping about, you didn't do anything over the last couple of days. So hopefully that's not the case, but naturally, it's one thing that you will run into. Travis says, I think the break may affect the younger guys more than the older guys. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I always equate it to this. Experience, right? Experience. Think about if you have a new job, right? And you have to get X amount of assignments done. Could be a holiday, could be a weekend, could be whatever the case it may be. And again, I know every job is different, so it won't necessarily work for every job that I'm talking about. But you try to plan. You try to, over time, use your experience to your knowledge, to your advantage. Use that knowledge. And guys know how to handle that. Guys know how to handle their body. Guys know how to be able to turn off that switch when they need to, but be able to turn it right back on. So, yeah, for the younger guys, it's going to be different for them. Now, I do think that for some of these players, and again, I know that it's the timing's a little bit different, but I think with high school football, especially in this part of the country, because I didn't have the luxury of having spring football up north when we were in high school. But I think a lot of these players, because they've gone through some type of spring practice before, they understand that this time of the year, okay, it's football time. Some guys, it takes them a little bit longer because they don't have that ability, that luxury, excuse me, of having spring football, depending on where they played high school ball. So I think overall, I think it's going to be a good teaching moment for a lot of these younger guys because there's been a lot of younger guys that have been really making an impact. Desmond Umeozulu has been playing incredibly, incredibly well. And that's a name that Beamer has been very, very adamant to make sure he mentions during press conferences. He mentioned him today. He's mentioned him several times throughout the spring. We've also heard from Clayton White. We've heard from his positional coach as well, Sterling Lucas. Umeozulu is doing an outstanding job. And that's just one of the young, talented players that they have on this team. There's a lot of young players on this team that could make an impact to see the field right away. And at some of those positions, again, not knowing what's going to happen with the transfer portal, not knowing what's going to happen with some of these players who are trying to come back from injury, and I'm going to pick on the edge position right now. Who knows what Terrell Dawkins is going to be able to do for you this year? Who knows what a guy like Jordan Strawn's going to be able to do coming back from injuries, both those players. Talented guys when healthy, but both players have been plagued. They've had some really freaking bad luck throughout their career. They've been plagued by injuries. And when you're going into a season, knowing that your positional group is thin already, and the guys that you're counting on the most are probably the guys that have that experience, but they have a lot of injuries in their past. You need everyone to be friggin' ready. So with how thin that room is, we've heard about it the last couple of weeks. They've been able to make the most out of their opportunities as far as reps go. Umeozulu is no exception. He's making the most out of it. Travis again, and I certain, tampering may happen since the portal is about to reopen. Look, what I've discovered, I'm not saying this wasn't the case before. It certainly was, but what I've discovered more than anything, players are the ones that really communicate with a lot of these other players at other schools to get the conversations going. To at least drop that idea in their head. Hey, man, you'd like to play for this guy. Hey, man, and I'm not saying specifically South Carolina is doing this. I'm talking about in general with college football. In general. Because with some of the players that South Carolina lost, I know that that was the case with some of them. I know that with some of the players South Carolina has acquired, some of it started this way. And that's not to say all of it was tampering. Some was and some was. But again, players, for as long as recruiting has existed, they've always talked with their buddies. They've always talked with players from their state that they meet throughout this process. Or maybe on a recruiting visit, they built a relationship with, or whatever the case may be. And they go to a different school, but they stay in contact and DM each other, whatever the case may be. So I bring that up because I do feel like it's just the reality of it. But I feel like a lot of players, it makes those waters a little bit more muddy muddier to be able to see through just because you have a lot of the players really setting it up more than anything. Travis, again, to end on a positive, the break could also be what the young guys need to slow down the game. Sure, with the install, some heads are spinning. Yes, I mean, the beauty about this time of the year, Travis, is that when you're talking about installing, and again, we know that from an offensive standpoint, it's a new offense, right? Dal's bringing a new offense in. But at the same time, too, in the spring in comparison to fall camp, I mean, shoot, there could be 2 days and then you're installing a new part of your offense or new part of your defense that third or second day. I mean, every 3 days. I mean, typically it's every 2. At least that's how we did in college. So I can only imagine what it's like here, SEC ball. So I bring that up because, yeah, for a lot of these guys, their heads are probably spinning, even though it is the spring. And that's the beauty of being able to enroll early, that the pace itself, I'm not saying it's not fast. Of course it's fast. Much faster than a lot of these guys are used to, regardless if they played 5A or wherever the hell, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, obviously here in South Carolina. Doesn't matter where they are coming from. It's going to be fast. And it's not necessarily the play on the field that I'm talking about with fast. It's going back to what you mentioned, Travis, which is the ability to process and go out there and react quickly. That's the biggest difference between high school and college. When you're talking about the speed, it's being able to play fast, not thinking, because there's more information that you're having to process now than ever before. So for a lot of these guys, they come in here and their heads are swirling around. They're just their mind is going in 8 different directions. So, yeah, I mean, some players need that break. They need that break. And to have an opportunity to do this from a mental standpoint, it could certainly help. No question about it. Gonna take a quick time out, guys. Appreciate you hanging out with us on a Tuesday night. It's GC Live Talking Tuesday night. Intern Joe working the Masters this week. I don't know if it was some type of school thing where he got invited. He's helping out in the club. I can't remember exactly. He's doing something pretty cool, though. So shout out to Intern Joe having an opportunity to hang out at Augusta. A little score update real quick for you guys. South Carolina and North Carolina, 13th ranked team taking on the 6th ranked Gamecocks. It remains scoreless in the 3rd inning, bottom of the 3rd, that is. South Carolina has 1 on and 1 out. We'll keep you updated if that score changes during this broadcast. And if you're listening to us on Gamecock Central's podcast platform, we appreciate you guys doing that. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Helps us as we continue to grow that, as well as the Gamecock Central YouTube page. Turn the alert button on. It is free to sign up. You can catch all your favorite GC Live shows, as well as original content from Gamecock Central. But as always, as we do, we want to thank our sponsors for today's show. And Clint Hammond, he has been a long-time supporter, not just Gamecock Central, but GC Live. Give him a call over at the Mortgage Network. He'll be able to help you during a time right now where I know a lot of people are looking to buy homes, okay? Rates drop a little bit. I was fortunate to buy a home about a year ago before everything started to spike up. Clint can make it easy for you. He did that for our good buddy Wes Mitchell, and he also did it for Gamecock quarterback, the former captain, Perry Orth. Give him a call over at 803-576-4450, and he'll be able to help you out with making that process easy. Thinking about making things easier. Tax season, told intern Joe, just 10 more days away. Got to make sure that you have your taxes taken care of. I'm actually going through this process right now, and the people that I called, well, Liberty Tax, be able to help you overcome that taxiety. The process, I'll tell you right now, first time using them, the process could not be easier. You could talk to them on the phone. You could go in person. They can do it online, set it all up for you, plug in all your information that you need to do. It's been as easy as advertised. So shout out to Wes Mitchell putting me on with our friends over at Liberty Tax, and they have just been absolutely outstanding. Give them a call at 803-462-5576. But remember, tax season, we're here, right? Don't wait any longer. Give them a call and let them know that Gamecock Central sent you guys on over. So we pick things up here. Got about another 15, 20 minutes to go before we wrap things up here on this Talking Tuesday night. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Top Gamecock. What up, Mike? Love that ad read. Well, I'm no intern Joe. Intern Joe, he's got his Cliff Notes in front of him, and he does a great job with them. Our little intern Joe, he's growing up so quickly. He's going to be a regular Joe, and he'll be a Joseph one day. One thing I do want to mention, though, as I go back from some of the notes that I wrote down from Beamer's press conference today, and even going back to, we'll mention some of the positional coaches that spoke last week since the last time we had a GC Live Talking Tuesday. Some things that Beamer wants to see more of with this offense. One thing he did mention is he felt like from a communication standpoint, the offense did a good job. And when you have a new play caller, when you have the coaches off the field for that first scrimmage, and they're off on the sideline during practices, and I'm sure they do situational work where the coaches are off the field, and we've seen that at times, even when we're walking out after the 6 periods that the media is allowed to observe, and they have the headsets on, and they're trying to replicate that game-like feel. Having the coaches off the field completely, like it's a game, that's how you're able to figure out how good that communication really is. So Beamer mentioning that about the offense, that stood out today. The other thing, too, that he wants to see, which I don't want to say it's worrisome right now, because at this point of the year, this time of the year in spring, and Beamer, actually, this is a question that I asked Shane. Typically, defenses are going to be ahead of the offense. Throw in the fact that you have an offense that is going through an offensive coordinator change. Naturally, they will be behind more times than not. But that's not to make excuses. That's just to say, when I say this next part, keep all that in mind. Beamer wants to see more explosive plays with this offense. He felt like they left some on the table this past weekend in that scrimmage on Saturday. He felt like they needed to be able to do a better job of converting the deep ball. And I think naturally when we hear those things, we think, okay, Spencer, Luke Doty, whoever the quarterback is, they got to throw the ball better, right? And I'm not trying to take blame off of them because I did not see the scrimmage. It was a close scrimmage. But I bring this up because hopefully it's not one of those things that you're worried about the offensive line. The offensive line's not giving you protection. Because think back to last year, there were times, Rattler may have missed the guy downfield, whether it be a step or two, behind, ahead, whoever the case may be. And then as the season went on, he was able to convert some of those deep balls. But one of those reasons why he wasn't able to make some of those completions is because he was still adapting to that time, that timer that you need to have in your head as a quarterback to know when to step up in the pocket, when the hell to get out. And with that offensive line last year, they struggled a little bit at the beginning of the year. Felt like they got better. Is that the case with this offensive line? There are faces who are returning this year who have experience at starting on the offensive line. But as a whole, this offense and the rapport they have with one another, it's going to be different. One thing I will say about the offensive line, because I kept echoing it throughout the offseason when he announced that he was transferring over to South Carolina. Nick Gargiulo, it felt like for a while, would be your starting center based on everything that we were told, based on the vision that South Carolina had when they brought him in here. But because of the strengths and weaknesses of other guys around him, and that's not to say people are weak playing this position or that position, He's doing a tremendous job at guard. And at this point, I feel like that's the position that he will likely play next season. He will play guard. Again, he has the ability to play center. He also has the ability to play tackle. Did that over at Yale too. Played center, though, last season at Yale, 10 games, and he was the captain for the Bulldogs. But before that, majority of his time was spent at tackle. So point being is he's a guy that you could truly plug anywhere on the offensive line. And you pray to God that injuries don't hit this offensive line, which unfortunately we've seen over the last couple of years. In the event that does happen, though, and he's playing the guard position, and you need to put him at the other guard position or move him from tackle or even at center, he has the ability to do that. So, Gargiulo, Mr. Plug me in. I'll do whatever you need to do. That's kind of where South Carolina stands with him right now on the offensive line. Again, guys, South Carolina, and now I have the notes in front of me, they will practice next week. They will be off for Easter weekend. Not just the players, but the coaching staff as well. They will practice after Easter on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then they will be taking to Williams-Brice on the 15th for the spring game. Some other notes from today. He felt like they needed to do a better job this year, and I'm sure they've done situational periods at practice. I don't know what the case was for the spring game, the specifics, but I'm sure there was a period at the end, if not in the middle, because as we know with Shane Beamer and a lot of college coaches out there, they like to do these periods called sudden change, and they'll just flip the script completely, and they want to throw you into a situational period just to be able to see how you're going to respond. That was the case today at practice. I believe it was Xavier Legette and O'Donnell Fortune. They lined up for a one-on-one. We were on the opposite end of the field, media. We're in the far end zone, closest to the ops building. And we were only able to go from, left to right on those two fields. We were not able to go down on the opposite side of the field where they were. And I want to say the ball was probably at the 5-yard line, something like that. It was a one-on-one period, one-on-one opportunity, to close out the period. So I bring those things up because I'm sure South Carolina has been practicing putting games away, but that's something that Beamer really, really, really harped on today and how disappointed he's been over the last couple of years. Jonathan Jones says, who do you think takes the number 2 quarterback spot? Luke Doty. Luke had some really nice passes in practice going back to last week. I want to say that was Thursday that I was there. And then he had some nice throws today too. Lenoris Sellers had a great spring game this past weekend. And great might be a little strong, but he looked really good from what I was told. So his growth continuing to come along. But I think with Doty, the thing about it is Doty is a guy that he has ability. He's shown it before. And he did that not being 100% healthy. And he was also thrown into the mix his freshman year when the whole freaking team just called for what it is. They sucked. He had nothing around him. Guys were getting hurt. I mean, really. It was Shi Smith, Kevin Harris, and that was your offense. His first year when he was thrown into the mix. So I think right now, and I'm not going to be surprised by any means, and I expect it, barring a injury setback, which hopefully is not the case, but I expect Doty to be the number 2 guy. And I know that there's people out there that are excited about Lenoris, but again, he's a freshman, okay? Slow down. See how things play out with him. But it's obviously promising to hear that he had a good spring game. scrimmage this past weekend. We'll see him in the spring game. We'll see these other quarterbacks in the spring game as well. And from what I was told too, and I don't know the specifics about how Norris moved around, but Rattler was Rattler was the only quarterback that wasn't live in the scrimmage this past weekend. I know Beamer really didn't go into any of that, but from what I was told, Rattler was the only QB that wasn't live. Doty, Sellers, all the other quarterbacks, Davis, Gauthier, all of them were live. So we're not naive that a part of Doty's game, a part of Lenoris's game is the ability to move around. And I mean, shoot, Spencer's even able to do that. He did a much better job towards the end of the season, especially as the season went on. So the way this offense is looking, you need to be able to move around a little bit. I'm not saying you got to go out there and look like freaking Michael Vick or no one's saying that. No one's saying that. But the ability to, use your feet to extend plays, to be able to roll out a lot of RPOs, a lot of read options where you're kind of just reading that end, right? I mean, RPO, you're thinking about the outside linebacker. In this case, just your basic read, triple option, whatever the case may be. And you're reading that end, you're trying to see what he's doing. And if you're able to extend plays with your feet a little bit based on what this offense could look like and what they're trying to accomplish, because I can tell you right now, this is an offense that could look very, 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 very different this season from a statistical standpoint based on how they want to play this season. Fast pace, making plays, getting up to the ball. And when you think about going back to what we were talking about with Joyner before, they have the ability to do some fun things in offense. They have the ability, if they want to play quick, they want to play fast. They have the ability to get very creative. And that's a whole nother level that we can get on at some point. Probably a little too early here on April 4th. Big Red says, should Spencer look better because he's had time in the system, or will young guys around him make it hard to go all out at times? Spencer look better because he's had time in the system, or will young guys around him make it hard to go out at all times? I think the ability to be in a college, and when I say system, I'm not talking specifically about Dal Loggins because Dal, of course, wasn't here a year ago. But the fact that he's been at South Carolina, just even the dumbest little things, right? Where's the bathroom? Where's the locker room? Where's this store bring you? Where's the elevator? What's the easiest way to get to the parking lot, right? Little things like that. Rattler's just more comfortable with being at USC. So you throw that out the window in terms of comfortability. He's comfortable. He's comfortable. Now he has to just learn a new offense. Well, he's had to do that the last, 3 years. He's had 3 different offenses. Now, granted, of course, he was at Oklahoma before his final year with the Sooners, but you get the point. He played in 3 different offensive systems. Oh, this will be the 3rd. I think the young guys, though, are – it's one of those things where it's like there's not any quarterback controversy. It's not even a question who the starting quarterback is. And he knows that. All the other guys know that. You think back to the last couple of years, I mean, shoot. Remember there was a period of time once Jake Bentley left, it was just like, who the hell is going to be the starting quarterback? Who's going to start this week if this happens or this guy's hurt or whatever the case may be? That's not the case. So I hope that answers your question, Big Ring. I don't know if that was specifically what you meant by that. Seth says, St. John's Prep helmet on the shelf. That's right. Right. Where is it? Right here. It's my high school one. Got some, got the Assumption one, and then I've been fortunate to get a bunch of helmets from South Carolina since I've been down here. And then this one right next to me, where is it? Here we go, right here. You guys see on the screen. That was actually from George Rogers when I emceed his charity event a couple of years ago, and Herschel Walker signed it because they surprised me. They had like all the Heisman guys that were there that night signed it. Archie Griffin signed it. Johnny Rogers. It's a really, really cool gift that he gave me. So very grateful for that. But those are all the helmets that we have here. And speaking about George Rogers, for those of you that don't know, I got that at George's event last year. Mike Tyson Punch-Out poster that he signed. Thought that was pretty cool. Travis says, outside of defensive back and linebacker and edge, a lot of young guys probably won't play. And Travis, I don't remember if it was you that said that last week or brought that up or someone else that brought it up, but that's something that we could start to see over the next couple of years. And I think we mentioned this last week, so I don't really want to dwell on it too much, but that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing if some of these younger guys aren't seeing the field right away by any means. What that means is, number one, you've done a hell of a job recruiting, whether it be from a out of high school standpoint or out of the transfer portal. And you have guys that are ready to go. You'll have young players that aren't necessarily going to have to be thrown into the mix. Now, as you mentioned, there's a couple positions there. I'm going to bring it back up again. Defensive back's always one of those positions. Always one of those positions. You have 5 defensive back positions, 2 safeties, a nickel, and 2 corners. And obviously that could, that can vary depending on the packages if you're playing in a 4-2-5 defense, right? Do you have a safety out of that mix? Do you throw an extra linebacker? But, we're talking about 4-2-5, which is what South Carolina plays. Yeah, defensive back is certainly a position where younger players could see the field this season. Linebacker. And when I say young players, I'm talking sophomore as well as freshman. Okay, I'm not just talking freshman. Pup Howard, he's been getting a lot of reps. He's a big freaking guy. And as Beamer's mentioned before, I think Clayton White mentioned it too, having him practice with the team during those Gator Bowl practices based on what the NCAA allows you to do with the early enrollees, if they hit, X amount of credits and this and that, and they're good to go, and they're cleared to do that, he's been able to come in here, even though that was only a couple months ago. It's in a way that he's kind of like already like a sophomore because he understands a lot of the things that they're trying to do schematically from a defensive standpoint. And he also understands what he needs to do from just an everyday thing, right? Just going out there and being able to know where he's supposed to stand in the stretching lines. I mean, like all these stupid little things that you wouldn't think about that much, you overlook. Because he's been able to be here already in the past. And again, wasn't too long ago, he's been able to blend in pretty well. Pretty well. Greg says, what do we know about the Utah State linebacker, Mike? I'm on vacation, so I haven't been keeping up. So again, I don't know the specifics of what I can and can't talk about. I don't work for the university, so I don't think I can talk about all that stuff. See if Wes brought any notes up about it today. But yes, I'm definitely going to butcher his last name, though. But this is the guy that, if I can share the screen here, that you're talking about, Craig, I will do that. But this is the player that we saw at South Carolina today. So that's the player. That's the player that you're talking about, Craig. What we know about him is that he was over at Utah State, as you can see right there. He is a grad transfer. So South Carolina is able to pick him up. He's ready to go, right? Comes right on in, ready to go. You see from the recruiting industry comparison. 3-star. I'll say this: big guy, lean, looks like someone that could really excel in a 4-2-5 defense. Um, I don't know much about him. I was not too familiar with him before today, but going back to when he originally committed to Utah State, you can see the schools that was looking at him. But again, I don't know how much you really spend time looking at that and think, okay, well, he was at this school. He was getting looked here. I mean, this is a couple years back now, right? And what this kid is able to bring to the table, he could be, and obviously I'm using the extreme case, but he could be like a Juice Wells. He could be like a Nate Atkins. He could be one of these players that come on in, they transfer in from a smaller school, and they're able to bring a lot to the table. And they're able to outplay whatever the star rating they have from us at On3 or some of the other recruiting sites out there. Big Red. It is looking like we're getting a foothold in the upstate of South Carolina recruiting, a pipeline possibly. Big Red, I'm glad you brought this up because, yes, South Carolina, since the last time we talked, they were able to land a big-time commitment. A big-time commitment. And the thing about adding Blake Franks, right? Some people will get caught up with the star system. Okay, he's a 3-star. We want to see more 4s and this and that. This is a kid that he's got a lot of raw talent. It's going to take some time probably to develop him. But at the same time, too, he is a player that a lot of schools were very interested in, including Clemson, including Alabama. So when you hear schools like that, it just goes to show how talented this kid is. And the fact that USC has now landed, they have now landed 2 from Greenville? Yeah, 2 from Greenville. In this recruiting class, things are changing. Things are changing with USC when it comes to being able to recruit in Clemson's backyard. And any Clemson person that tells you, oh, they do the old, song, it's the same song and dance, right? They recruit a kid, they don't get him. Oh, well, we didn't really want him. That's not the case. They wanted Blake Franks. They wanted Mazio Bennett. They wanted some of these guys. So, again, I bring this up because Cam Pringle, excuse me. I said Mazio. What they've been able to do has been incredible. It's been incredible. Just to make sure I clarify here, because I said Mazio's name, and I know some people will be like, they'll get hung up on that. Meant Cam Pringle. Mazio wasn't offered from Clemson. Of course, as we know, he was offered from Tennessee. But the point being is South Carolina has done a good job of being able to go into Clemson's backyard and out-recruit them. And not just out-recruit them, but also out-recruit North Carolina, which it's really easy to lose a guy in the upstate to North Carolina. So to be able to put that fence up to keep them still in state, I think it speaks volumes of what South Carolina has been able to do. We'll wrap things up from a recruiting standpoint. I'll show the chart. I'll answer some of your questions that you guys have, and then we'll get going. As Greg says, if you are starting a bunch of freshmen, your program isn't where it needs to be. We are finally building quality depth. No question about it, Greg. No question. And obviously, there'll always be outliers, right? There'll always be outliers that where you'll have young guys be able to, see the field quicker than others, right? If you're talking about that linebacker, AJ, and goodness, Von AJ, I'm so sorry. I cannot pronounce your name. We'll get a pronunciation, but he is not committed to South Carolina, Craig. No commitment yet, to my knowledge. But he was there visiting today. See, we have hit on almost every transfer. And yeah, and again, transfer portal, that second window, that spring window period will open up in a couple weeks. So look, at the end of spring football, from Division 1 down to Division 3, it's not uncommon for coaches and players to be sitting down with each other at the table and kind of just going over what the expectations are for what they have for that individual heading into the next season. And for some of those players, when they had those meetings with those coaches at the end of the regular season last year, it might not have necessarily played out the way that they envisioned it would in the spring. So there could be some players for South Carolina, just like there's going to be players across the whole country, that there will be players that will enter the portal. So again, it comes down to being a numbers game and what South Carolina needs, what South Carolina has. I have the notifications on for Shane Beamer, so his phone was blowing up. So I just want to make sure there wasn't a welcome home. That's not the case. But you never know with that Beamer guy. Can always slide a welcome home in on you past 8 o'clock on Tuesday. That would be right up his alley. No question about it. Travis says, Franks is most likely a guard, but has the length to play tackle. He's a guy you have to take mama's. What? You have to take mama's. He's capable of being a multi-year starter. Yeah, he's a big guy. He's a big guy. I'm going to pull up his chart real quick. Let's see. Blake Franks. So here's Blake. As you guys can see, 6'5", 315 pounds. 6'5", 315 pounds. And as I mentioned before, I wanted to show where South Carolina stands with their recruiting class. So right now they're 9th. Florida State just ahead of them. And as you guys can see, the teams who are in front of South Carolina, 3 of them are in the SEC East. And it feels like that's always a comment that people bring up. It's like, 9th in the country when it comes to recruiting. But look, 3rd in the East. Welcome to the SEC. And when they possibly get away from divisions in the next couple years with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, you'll be seeing even, look, 1, 2, 3, 4 SEC teams ahead of South Carolina and then LSU there. But again, and I know it's early, but still, seeing South Carolina ahead of Clemson, if you're a Gamecock fan, that has to make you feel pretty good. If you're Shane Beamer and that coaching staff, that has to make you feel pretty good. Going back to last season, South Carolina finished strong, being able to finish 16th in the country, which was up 12 spots from the previous year. So I say that because if USC is able to finish 9th or better, you're looking at least at a 7 spot bump in this year's recruiting class. But again, long ways to go. Long ways to go. The trenches. Yep. The trenches are about to look like the SEC trenches and how they should look. Yeah. And look, think about the last couple of years from a fan base standpoint, whether you are on the message boards over at Gamecock Central or another site in town or social media or listening to sports talk radio in this town or even listening to the SEC network. One thing that we heard so much about was that South Carolina didn't have the bodies, the size when it came to competing in the SEC because of their linemen, specifically their offensive linemen. What have they done going back to last year's recruiting class, specifically this past one, 2023, and now what we're seeing in 2024? They have gone after the offensive linemen extremely, extremely hard. And the fact that a lot of these guys are local players, I think it just speaks volumes of just the relationships that Beamer, Lonnie Teasley, Greg Atkins, Taylor Edwards, Sam Serbay, and that entire coaching staff have done since they arrived here, which is build relationships organically. Because a lot of these relationships that they built as soon as they got here to South Carolina, Beamer got here in December of 2020. This coaching staff, for the most part, was assembled by January of 2021. As soon as they got here, just recruiting their tails off. And because of that, a lot of those guys that they started talking to back then were part of this year's class. And that's why you're seeing so many players start to commit to South Carolina. Appreciate that, Michael. Thanks for watching. Do we have depth in the kicking game? Or do we need it with our quality already? I think it's one of those things that right now, I mean, you kind of have it figured out, right? Mitch Jeter will be your guy, and Alex Herrera has a tremendous camp in the summer. Kai Kroger, arguably one of the best punters in the country, could be a guy that not only earns SEC honors, but we're talking possibly All-American honors this season. Hunter Rogers is back as well. He's done a tremendous job. So I think kickoff duties, that might be one to keep an eye on. But I feel like special teams, as far as, those positions now from the kicking game standpoint, I think they're, pretty much a lock. Craig says, nice Masters lid. My son picked me up one yesterday. Yep. Had a chance to go last year for the first time. We were able to get tickets from a family friend, and we brought our 93-year-old grandfather. He'll be 90. He's 94 now. He'll be 95 in September. He walked the whole freaking course. I think he went all 4 days. I just went one with him, but that was awesome. First person that I saw as soon as I got there, of course, was Marty Smith in front of the scoreboard. And then you keep walking, you see so many random people there. You saw, goodness. Rex Ryan was there. And Ryan Fitzmagic on the first hole. That was pretty cool. Do you think we have a good shot on Walker? I won't specifically speak about some of these recruits that I don't know much about, just because Wes and Chris, they're the recruiting guys. So Walker, I have not had any updates on where we stand with, or South Carolina stands with him. Is it safe to say that we haven't seen this type of success in South Carolina since Spurrier's time with the pro? No question, Big Red. And like I said at the beginning of the program, I'd argue that the buzz might be even more now than it was back then in some regards, just because with social media growing the way that it has, I mean, you're seeing it in recruiting. You're seeing it through the transfer portal. And you have to be able to get that word out there. So I think the buzz, it's not just in Columbia right now. I think people are talking about this program on a much, much wider platform in comparison to obviously last season and the last couple of years. But And that's not to say this team's better than any of the, Spurrier teams. And I'm not saying that. They have a long ways to go before we're talking about that. I'm just talking about from a notoriety standpoint. And of course, NIL plays a role with that, right? Maybe you have to talk about the program a little bit more now than you did back then. If you're on the coaching staff, or you just feel like you see more videos now from the program because they have to be more visible and showing you what's going on, just to be able to keep up with other programs who are also doing that kind of stuff. Craig says, I think he's recruiting better than Spurrier. 125. But Spurrier was there when we happened to have some big-time ballers in state who stayed home. And as we all know, Beamer was part of that as well. Being able to recruit a lot of those local guys and keeping them in state. A little polar to game. Someone will ask me what I'm drinking. A little water. But no, I think again, we've said this many times before, going back to even when Shane arrived here. He has the blueprint when it comes to knowing what success looks like at South Carolina, because he was able to do it and be part of it. And again, obviously, it wasn't for the full duration of some of the best years in South Carolina football history, but he played a big role with laying down that foundation and being part of that foundation. So knowing that, I'm not surprised that he's been able to come in here and has been able to do a tremendous job from a recruiting standpoint. And he's also been able to really sell the program in ways that I kind of feel like you have to. If you're in South Carolina's shoes, especially where he was when he arrived here, you have to be able to get the word out about this program as many times as you can. He's hopped on every show under the sun, and he's just been himself. And when you're selling something, that's one thing, right? You can say, okay, great lockers, great facilities, great fan base, whatever. But until they start seeing the winning, that's what you need in order to be able to take that next step. So the guys that have been able to come in here in those first 2 years, whether it was through the transfer portal, whether it's through recruiting since Beamer arrived here, or whether it be some of the guys that have been here going back to the old coaching staff, they've all played a big role with that. And because of that, that's why South Carolina sits here today with a guy like Nicholas Harbor getting ready to come here next season, and a lot of high 4-star recruits because of what's took place over the last couple of years. Travis says Beamer is running into the next golden era, but this one is more offensive, especially along the offensive line. I'd have to go back and really look at the O-line. I think the thing about it is, you think of the talent they've had during that time period. They had some good defensive players. But if you're saying about the offensive line, I mean, shoot, there were some talented guys that Spurrier and obviously Beamer being back in that recruiting set, they did a tremendous job of. And as we all know, Spurrier, offensive minded. So we'll have to see how things play out from an offensive standpoint. I mean, but those are big shoes to fill. Big shoes. Big Ragged, you threw the word new here, so I'm going to have to try to figure out where you meant to say new. Is it fair to compare our new guys to legends of the past? Could that be too much pressure? Or is it a way to push them to be better, be the best selves that they can be? I think anyone that comes into South Carolina and they walk into that ops building as a player, you see instantly to the right of you that Heisman Trophy that George Rogers won in 1980. You see to the left of you all the trophies that have been won from bowl games. A lot of Outback Bowls and Capital One Bowl and just bowl games. You see all that to the left. You walk down the hallway. You see the All-Americans, the names on the wall. You walk down towards the parking lot in the ops building in that corner, past the locker room, past the dining hall area for the players, and you see on the wall helmets of NFL teams, and you touch it. And what you're able to see is those players who played for South Carolina, who played for those teams. So they're constantly reminded about who was there before them. And I think with some of these guys, expectations and trying to be the next and this and that, I don't think it's ever a bad thing. But to make a comparison to women's basketball and to use a women's basketball quote that this women's basketball team has used for the last couple of years, as long as you keep the main thing, right? Aaliyah Boston, she came in here and instantly, I know it's a different sport, but instantly there were comparisons to Aaliyah Boston. For Aaliyah Boston to Asia Wilson. Could she live up to that hype? And naturally you hear the cliche, I'm just going to be me, or, just let her be herself. That's great. That's fantastic. No one's asking you to be someone else. But from a sports debate standpoint, when you're talking about sports, naturally, when you look at someone, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, whatever, someone very talented, there's going to be comparisons. How do you handle that external pressure? So for a lot of the guys in that secondary, you think of the younger players, right? You think about the DQ Smiths of the world, the Nick Eamon Worries, right? You even think about a guy like O'Donnell Fortune. You think of a guy like, you think of the guys that Spalding. What I'm trying to get at is it's not necessarily just about, for like a Nick Eamon Warrior. It's not just necessarily about, DJ Swearinger, right? Can he live up to those shoes? No, it's about the guys that were just here the last couple of years. Jalen Foster is with the team every day. And I don't know how much Foster's name gets brought up. And obviously Nick wasn't here for Foster's last season. But that's something that people probably take note of. The fact that he was an All-American. And again, you're walking by in the hallway, and you see that list of All-Americans that South Carolina has been able to produce. So I mentioned that, but again, some of these corners, Darius Rush leaving, Cam Smith, think of J.C. Horn over the last couple of years and what he was able to do here and go into the pros and being the first defensive player drafted in his class. Izzy Mukwamu. Just the most recent years, right? Some of these guys played with those players. Always is going to be pressure. It's always going to be pressure. I got you, Travis. As Craig says, still 0-0. Tar Heels only 2 hits through 5. I don't know what it is about that freaking stadium. But South Carolina, and I'm sure a lot of fans would agree, for whatever reason, it has just been brutal to USC. Brutal. But yes, scoreless still, bottom of the 6th. Petrie just walked. And there's one out. One out in the bottom of the 6th. That's your baseball report so far. Well, that's going to do it here for us, guys, on this Talking Tuesday night. Appreciate you putting up with just me tonight. Intern Joe, again, he is out in Augusta stuffing his face with pimento cheese sandwiches and egg salad sandwiches. And I don't even know what specifically he's doing. I think he just helps out at the clubhouse. I really have no idea, but it's a solid gig. Good for Intern Joe. And I appreciate everyone that tuned in tonight. Enjoy the Masters this week. And we will have updates for you guys heading into next week's spring game. So next Tuesday's show, we will break down what we want to specifically see, who we're looking to have a big game, who this could be the coming out party for a player or two. We've seen that happen in the past. And could that be on the table for this year's spring game? We will have to see. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Vedrick, thank you. Craig, Everyone else as well, if you missed any of our show tonight, head on over to Gamecock Central's YouTube page and you can find this show, GC Live Talking Tuesday night 4/4 in its entirety. And if you're not already a subscriber to Gamecock Central's YouTube page, be sure to subscribe for free today. Turn that little alert button on too. So anytime there's a GC Live show, whether it be with me, Wes, Chris, Colin, or anyone over at GC, as well as any Gamecock Central original content, you guys will be able to see that as well. Or if you're a podcast listener, wherever you get your podcasts, you'll be able to listen to this podcast, probably uploaded within the next hour or two. So check it out there as well. Have yourself a great Tuesday night and enjoy watching the rest of the ball game.